Good morning. Good morning. It's hard enough with all the people this committee's talking all the time, but you people on the wall have got to be quiet. Good morning. Y'all bow with me, please. Gracious Heavenly Father, for another day, we're just eternally thankful. All the many blessings that you give us individually and corporately, we want to say thank you for. Keep your hand on us. Let us do things that are pleasing in your sight. Guide us and lead us. Let it be another wonderful day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mr. Yates.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with y'all. I bring you House Bill 808, and I ran a summary that I took into the subcommittees and so forth. And I'll just read it to you. It pretty well covers it. Presently, under Georgia law, members of the military reserves and Georgia National Guard who are disabled and retired and are receiving 90% totally and permanently disabled and receiving this pension are not taxed for the disability payments under Georgia income tax. With the passage of this bill, all members who are fully disabled and retired from the armed forces would also be exempt. And from about line 17 on down, it explains what various shades of disability.
It's on the yellow sheet. It's not on the blue one.
It's 808, House Bill 808. It started out as Senator Albers, when the Senate wrote up the bill, and then he realized that they don't trust senators with money, so it's a money bill, so they put it over here, and I copied his bill.
Any questions? Thank you.
Uh-oh, my bad.
Pardon? No, I asked about that in the Rules in the Ways and Means Committee, and they didn't bring one up.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Yates.
Thank you. Y'all are very wise today.
Seatmate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I bring you today House Bill 717. And House Bill 717 is a bill that will hold dog owners who own vicious dogs that attack, maul, or kill another individual. It will make them have some responsibility and make them responsible for the actions of dogs that have been classified as vicious dogs.
Any questions? Thank you, Penny.
And I have one other small bill. Can I do that now, too?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I bring you House Bill 1082, and House Bill 1082 makes the Cook County probate judge nonpartisan.
Any questions?
No, not the probate judge. Scratch that one. It makes the
Chief
magistrate court judge.
Chief
Wrong
magistrate.
bill. Magistrate court judge.
How many of those you going to have?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all, when you come up here, tell us modified structure open, modified open, or structured so we can find you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On modified structured, House Bill 548, I think it's the 6th or 7th bill down, modified structure, first page. Bring to you this proposition.
Modified open.
I'm sorry, modified open. I just heard you say modified structure. Modified open on the first page, as I said, House Bill 548.
Go.
This is a measure to define an employee. It's in the code where an employee is defined in Georgia code, and all we seek to do is on page 3 say that individuals that are parties to a franchise agreement as defined under federal law would not be employees. There's a scope creep around the country where people are trying to fire through the franchise agreement and make the franchise are trying to have it both ways. They're trying to be a franchise, but when something bad happens, they're trying to roll it back up to the franchisor. So we simply want to make that predictable. We think predictability is good in business, and by doing this, it just puts in Georgia code the federal definition of a franchisor relationship, and that those are not employees. Ask the committee's favorable consideration of that and answer any questions.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, sir. I think you answered the question, Mr. Chairman, but under current federal rules, franchisees are not considered employees?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I also have House Bill 848, and that is the modified structure. That is at the top of page 3, 844. And sometimes I get things backwards, and sometimes I'm dyslexic, so I apologize. 844, top of page 3, modified structured. This seeks to simplify the validation of development authority bonds. It adds three points, lines 34 through 47, basically that the district attorney themselves did not have to be present at the validation. It also, in line 39, says you validate the bonds and any ancillary documents. And the last point, starting in line 42, says that there's a clock set on these appeals, so these validations, when they happen, can move forward, that there's not an open-ended opportunity for appeal. That's the committee's favorable consideration in that matter.
Any question? Thank you. And he does want to mention House Resolution 1237 again. Don't you? Don't you? Might not get another opportunity. Chicken Man, come on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise you this has nothing to do with chickens. On page 3, about the third one up from where it says structured rule, House Bill 1146, under modified structured. This is a much improved version of another bill we were doing, and it takes the vocational rehabilitation services and makes them a standalone agency attached to DHS for administrative purposes only. It creates a board of 9 people. 5 of them have to have disabilities to be on the board. It creates a director who serves at the pleasure of the board, appointed by the governor. And the stakeholders and advocacy groups are okay, and this goes back to what they've been wanting for several years. Best example I can give you of how it will be attached to DHS is if you compare it to the way EPD is attached to DNR. It's pretty much along that same path. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer them. So.
Ms. Abrams.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, this is just a general query. My book stops at 828. I don't have any bills after 828. And it's happened for a few other people back here.
I didn't want these 2 boys getting strained carrying that second book.
Here.
But we do have 2 books today. Who doesn't have book number 2? Everybody got one? Right there. Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCall.
You done with me?
I'm done.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I want to talk with you today at request House Resolution 1150 and its companion bill, House Bill that's 896. And let me say, these are two bills where you get that were asked for Friday. They're not on the consideration calendar. They were sent back to committee, and you asked that we make some changes because the constitutional amendment was written in legalese, educational jargonese that most people didn't understand, and we have made that where it's written in good old Duluthanese. So it says, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to assure that any 1 cent sales and use tax for educational purposes is distributed equally to a school system on a per pupil basis instead of FTE. And that's what that bill, the resolution does, Mr. Chairman. And then the enabling 896 explains that.
Let me redo. If y'all remember, last week we sent 896 back to committee. That was a mistake. We were supposed to send 1150 to committee. So what I want to do now is have a motion to withdraw 896 from the recommittal. Is that a word? Recommittal? All right, we got a motion to hear a second. All those in favor signify by aye. All right, so now everything that Mr. Coleman just told you is probably in order. Ms. Smith.
I just want to thank my esteemed colleague for the Colemanese explanation today.
Colemanese, yes, ma'am. Chinese, yes, ma'am.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Ms. Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified open on the very first page, House Bill 268 to do with rezoning of property, notification being additional on the posting of the sign, and also notification through the U.S. mail to all property owners there. Also on page 2, if I may go forward, I have modified structure, House Bill 161. This is a bill that was brought before you last year. There were a lot of questions in regards to it. We have spent the summer working on clarification, and you will notice that it came to you as a substitute from the Public Safety Committee to do with Mobility Safety Act, and it's looking at the traffic signals and the appropriate way of which to go through traffic signals, whether it be flashing lights, red lights, or where it's an inoperable light. So I hope that you will reconsider this and see the need to pass it for safety with motorcycles and small vehicles that are having problems getting through some of the lights.
Any questions on either bill? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you modified open. It's House Bill 208. This is probably one of the simplest bills you'll have all year. All we're changing is one little number. We're changing the back to work for educators that have retired. The repeal date was going to be June the 30th, 2016. We're asking to move that back to 2013. And I'll be glad to go through the history of this if you'd like.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The bill I had was modified structures, House Bill 1067, but I don't see it on the list. I know, Mr. Chairman, you told me to give you more time. This is a bonded warehouse bill dealing with pre-need monuments. Go ahead and buy them, bronze monuments. It may already be in the bonded warehouse. I don't.
Just hang.
1067.
I think you've got another number.
Sir? I'm sorry, that's my mistake.
I think you're 933.
There is another number. Got up too early this morning. Modified structure, it is,
933 under modified.
that is
open.
correct.
Modified open.
Wait a minute.
Top of the page. We're glad you've come
I'm sorry, it's
prepared this morning,
933, my bag, so it's not in the bonded warehouse.
Everybody gets an oops.
Sir?
Everybody gets an oops.
Yeah, I got up too early this morning, and I had my sights on this 1067, which hadn't come out of committee yet, so.
Another wonderful thing's happened to us.
Well, I got your attention, and it got my attention too, Mr. Chairman, so.
I really
But anyway, 933 is the bill, and
would anybody like to ask Mr. Rogers any questions on any of those bills that he's mentioned?
just 933, Mr. Chairman. We hadn't finished the other one yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I bring you under structured 1056. This is a Department of Revenue bill, and what this does is just provides consent with a federal provision that we have for the Servicemen's Civil Relief Act. Has to do with ad valorem tax. If they are deployed, this does not mean that it's collectible until they come back from their active duty service, and then that debt is taken care of at that time. 1056 is the very bottom of the last page.
Richard's cut me off. I was talking too much. Anything else?
That's it, sir.
Any questions of Mr. Battles? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask for House Bill 825. It's under modified open, about 6 from the bottom on the front page. This is a bill that was a request from the Professional Standards Commission to allow them to have additional time to complete their investigations when an educator is accused of a wrongdoing. As it is now, they have a 90-day time frame that they have to have their investigation completed. And when this becomes a criminal investigation, the district attorney's involved, they have no such time frame, and it pushes them to the point where they do have the evidence and they can't get ahead of the district attorney. So they're asking for to remove that 90-day restriction.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nix, the way I read this would create an unlimited time period for the commission decision to be heard and appealed. Given that the 90 days was designed to require speedy justice, was there any consideration in committee about creating a longer time period but not making it unlimited?
There was some discussion, but some of these things can go on for years, so there was no way determined to say that there was a specific time we could stop it.
But under the language in this bill, it could be years that a person would be held in limbo without having their appeal heard. Is it not true?
That is true. Now, this doesn't take away the local employer's right to act, but it does take away their right to act. What they're concerned about is a situation where you've got someone that is eventually found guilty, but if you've got that 90-day time frame, then after you get past that, then it's very difficult for them to be able to take their license.
So what happens to an educator who seeks an appeal, but the appeal is held in limbo for an indefinite period of time? Is their license suspended? Are they allowed to engage in work? Because my understanding was the 90-day time period was designed to both provide opportunity for the educator to have their appeal heard, but also to require that there be speedy action on the part of the judiciary.
As I understand it, until this is done, they can keep their license. It is not pulled.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My bill is House Bill 751. It's on page 1 under modified open rule. And this bill provides that future elections for the office of judge of the probate court of Jasper County be nonpartisan.
Any questions? Thank you.
Now, Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate for me to mention my second bill?
Yes, ma'am.
It's Senate Bill 268 on the second page under modified open rule. And this bill provides that future elections for members shall be conducted on a nonpartisan basis for Board of Education of Jones County.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Tell the senator he has to come too. Ms. Holmes. The senator's got to come too. I think that we have to show up over there for all our bills, therefore. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two bills I wanted to ask you about. Under modified open, House Bill 513 deals with life insurance. This is from dealing with discretionary groups, just like they do with group health insurance. It would allow the commissioner to choose if a group is eligible for a group life policy with the carriers in the state of Georgia. And I also have House Bill 931 dealing with domestic farm mutual insurance companies. There's 4 companies in the state of Georgia that were set up by the legislature some 100 years ago, and this bill has been worked out with the insurance commissioner to allow them to write additional property coverage in the state for and also allow them to write business in other counties, not just in the counties where they're located. And like I said, that bill would be up to the discretion of the insurance commissioner also to decide how much coverage they can write based on their assets.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring 2 bills for your consideration today. The first bill is House Bill 928 under modified open rule. This bill would allow the Board of the Peace Officers Annuity and Benefit Fund to hire a hearing officer in cases where there is a dispute. Currently, the board may do this, but only with disability cases. And if there's a disagreement, the only way currently for appeal is to the Superior Court. I ask your favorable consideration.
Next one.
Also on open rule on page 1, House Bill 987. This is also to do with the Peace Officers Annuity and Benefit Fund, and this would require members to inform the fund of any changes in their employment or duties.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait a second. Get back. Come, Ms. Riley.
I'm sorry.
We woke Larry up, so y'all just hold on.
Yeah, you went so fast and did so well. I almost back to House Bill 928.
Yes, sir.
I notice it's got a fiscal note with it, but it says it's a non-fiscal bill. How can you hire somebody if there's not a fiscal impact?
I don't quite have an answer for that. It was represented to me that it was non-fiscal.
It's kind of an anomaly to me. I'd like to get some further information on that. Okay.
I'd be happy to provide that.
Mr. Weld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Riley, is it not true that House Bill 928 requires a fiscal bill because this is a retirement bill? Isn't that true?
Thank you, Representative Weldon. You are correct.
And isn't it further true that this bill does not have an impact on the actuarial studies required for the retirement bills?
Thank you. That is also correct.
And accordingly, this bill authorizes the employment of a hearing officer, and it's not related directly to the funds that are held by the state. And accordingly, fiscal bill wouldn't have any actuarial impact upon the retirement system pension fund.
Representative Weldon, thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I apologize for Senator Miller. He should have been here. He came the other day, and I forgot to remind him.
He's been given clearance. He showed up, and you're toting the freight, right?
Yes, sir.
You're the one.
And members of the committee, I bring before you Senate Bill 339, which basically returns aviation assets back to Department of Natural Resources, Forestry, and Transportation from the Aviation Authority.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Epps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I present to you on the modified structured rule, House Bill 541, which is, this bill is to correct an apparent loophole in our current code relating to injury to court or intimidation or injury to officers of the court and to law enforcement officers by saying that one who, by threatening action, letter, or communication, endeavors to intimidate, injure, or impede officers of either class, either judicial or law enforcement officer, or the immediate families of law enforcement officers in retaliation or response to action in the discharge of such officers' official duties, shall be guilty or shall, upon conviction, be subject to fine, imprisonment, or both.
Any questions, Mr. Epps? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two bills to present, if that's okay. First is under modified open on page 2, Senate Bill 343. It's a bill to transfer the Comptroller General's title from the Insurance Commissioner's office into the State Accounting Office, which is an office within the Governor's staff. There's no cost associated with the transfer, and it won't require us to change any personnel or any budget issues.
I would remind you to remind Mr. Heath he has to stand on the wall, too.
I'll do that.
Next one.
Same page, under modified structured, House Bill 242, American Laws for Georgia Courts Act. It would require judges to apply Georgia law in domestic relations cases when the application of foreign law would violate a party's constitutional rights under the U.S. and Georgia constitutions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have 4 bills that I'd like for your favorable consideration. On page 2, the back of page 1, there's House Bill 988. This is to create a designation of the second week of November as Kindness Week. And it would create no holiday whatsoever, but it would just designate that week.
Could we have a change in that date?
This is 988.
Okay. If it can't be the 1st of March, we're not, okay, never mind. All right, next one.
Yes, sir, thank you. The other one is Senate Bill 309. This is Taylor's Law. Senator Jeffries has come before the Rules Committee last Friday to request this bill. I'm just renewing his request for this bill. Also, House Bill 745, which is a study for pulse oximetry screening for newborns. And then finally, under structured rule, renew my request for an ad valorem tax exemption for Butts County. This is a population bill requested. And I'd like your favorable consideration on these if possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions of Mr. Welch? Thank you. Mr. Brockway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structure, House Bill 899, Mr. Chairman, I ask that the committee send this back to Governmental Affairs Committee, please, sir.
Motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Coomer.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to follow up and let you know I've spoken to Senator Heath, and the reason he's not here this morning is he had his car broken into, and he's dealing with that this morning. I'd expected to see him here, and after we spoke, I called him. He told me that's why he's not here.
Well, that doesn't sound like a real excuse to me.
I can only offer the excuse. I can't vouch for its, usefulness to the chair.
Mr. Earhart, you getting in line? Thank you, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you.
Mr. Willard, you can sit if you...
I just had two of them. I thought I'd present up here if there was any questions. Quickly. I want to read to the committee. I'd like to read to the committee House Bill 641. It's a simple bill. Little housekeeping.
Okay, all right.
This is the rewrite of your juvenile code that we've all been awaiting, and it's been worked on for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a good product, and we're ready for it to go forward. Mr. Chairman, I'll answer your questions about it rather than trying to go through explaining it.
Which number again, Mr. Willard?
It's under Structured Rules, House Bill 641.
Okay.
Pardon me.
Any questions, Mr. Willard, on 641? Thank you. Next one.
I've got 3 others under Structured Rules. You have House Bill 942 and 944, which are the annual bills we do dealing with corrective measures within the code, the general code, and to the retirement code, which has to be done separately. And the last matter I have is House Bill 1049. This is a bill that is helping the local governments with their 911 revenues. We do not have any way currently to know who is in Georgia providing voice over internet protocol services, and we're not sure all of them are collecting and paying the fees that are required by law for that service, because it is a form of telephone service using the trunk lines of AT&T. It also clears up a confusion law dealing with what is called prepaid services. That is under Section 1 of House Bill 1049, and that clarifies that if you're doing it on a monthly bill, which some of them do, it is required to pay the same as Verizon, AT&T does now, which is $1.50 a month. 2 good bills for the, this is really a good bill for the local governments who have to support their 911 systems.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 2 propositions you're aware of. HB 53, I want to continue to put my name by that. I don't think it needs any more explanation. And then the second is House Bill 898. A very short explanation, more anecdotal than anything else. This creates the merchant acquirer, limited purposes banks. Should be, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. These are purely special purpose banks. They're not retail banking institutions. They're for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to allow the credit card processing companies, many of which we have in Georgia, the ability to have a bank chartered to service their needs. I guess anecdotally, we had an insurance company here moved to Nebraska years ago because of an issue with insurance premiums. This is a similar type of issue. We want to keep these jobs, these companies in Georgia. The state banking department has worked diligently with this proposition. They've made sure it's well capitalized. It's only for one specific purpose. It is clearly to allow these merchant acquirers, and these are the people who process credit cards, process the types of transactions that go on with respect to credit cards, everything from the actual swipes to the following up on the actual transaction. It's very narrowly tailored. The department has signed off on it, and it's a fairly simple proposition, even if it is in the obtuse language of the banking industry.
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Earhart, we were trying to take a look at this bill. Are there other states that have similar bills?
There are several states that have this capacity. That's one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that we keep these processors in the state of Georgia rather than going to a more...
Afterwards, if you could just sort of give us some of the other states so we can sort of flesh it out.
The Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Earhart, just a quick question. You've mentioned that you run the traps with the banking department. I assume they've gone ahead and just checked against any entanglements with federal law, regulations, Dodd-Frank, whatever it may be.
Yes, sir, Representative Gully. They spent a great deal of time. That's one of the reasons it's coming to you so late. The department has worked over every aspect of this bill. It started off as a significantly larger proposition, and I think they've done a really good job of streamlining the actual language. It makes it much simpler for them to authorize, and they've done a good job.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman Earhart. Would this affect a company like Total Systems? How would this impact that company? They do already employ about 4,000 people, I think.
That's correct. That's the type of company this is there to support. We want companies like Total Systems to be able to stay in Georgia and to take advantage of merchant acquirer banks. They need this type of bank to help them with their business model.
So could I discern from that they're threatening to leave if we don't do this for them? Or, I mean,
I wouldn't want to speculate that they'd pick up and move, but I would speculate that this is the kind of supportive legislation, business environment the state needs to do to help a company like Total Systems continue to provide for 4,000 jobs.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Earhart? If so, raise your hand. Thank you. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to request House Resolution 1376, which is under modified open rule. This is our annual conveyance for the different counties that we need to get on over into the Senate.
Any questions? Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request House Bill 673 under modified structure. This is the second page. Simply provides for a return to play protocol when a student athlete is suspected of sustaining a concussion. Also would like to request House Bill 692 right underneath that under modified structure, which some local boards have in fact requested, provides for a mechanism for a educational professional to return a bonus that they may have received for standardized test achievement if they admit to or adjudicated that they in fact falsified the results. While I do have the mic, Mr. Chair, I'd also like to put my name behind House Bill 535 and House Bill 684, both good bills as well.
Question? I don't have a button up here. If I may, Representative, regarding House Bill 692, in order to show fairness, does the bill also permit the clawing back of any bonuses by administrative personnel and superintendents?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Mitchell? Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name behind and ask for HB 535 by Representative Oliver, HB 681 by Representative Dickerson, and HB 684 by Representative Buckner.
What was the last one?
684. And these are all under modified open rule.
Mr. Cass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the modified open rule, House Bill 792,
once again, a paperwork reduction act for our non-public post-secondary institutions. Provides authorization to operate in the state of Georgia by means of accreditation. That's all that bill does.
Any questions? Mr. Rice.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Open Rule HB 900. This is the Georgia Motor Trucking Association bill to handle demolishing of trailers for scrap. And on the second page, under the modified open rule, House Bill 1024, which is a population bill that affects budget commission requirements in the four large counties.
Questions? Okay. Ms. Sheldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask for House Bill 1026. It's a population bill involving contracts with Sheriff's Department municipalities.
What? 10 what?
1026.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified instruction, House Bill 817 under modified structure, and that's the annual GDOT update bill. But I'd also, under modified open, like to put my name beside 594, Representative Burns, and Senate Bill 309.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 845, Dr. Watson's bill, merely an education bill. To remind the committee, in 1917, the entire city of Savannah was almost wiped out with a influenza virus that mutates every year and still does. Just an education bill. And also House Bill 268 that does two things, just allows, that's Representative Purcell's bill, allows us that are out of town, as we are today, to get a written notification by mail and puts the date for the hearing on the zoning changes.
Does that have to be just regular mail or?
Yes, or just regular mail.
Okay. Any questions? That must have been something that was a good bill. I don't know. Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to call the committee's attention to on the first page under open modified open House Bill 766. That's a bill that will tweak the American Law and Government Display Act. The current law says courthouses and judicial structures. We're changing that to public buildings because we found out we couldn't put that display in our own state capitol. So,
questions? Mr. Mitchell again.
Mr. Chairman, I did neglect to make a request when I formerly had the mic. I overlooked House Bill 681. I wanted to be in the number to request that one as well.
Anyone else? All right, gonna set it. Under structured rule, HB 944, do you hear a motion? Anyone opposed? It's on. The majority whip has asked for a 5-minute limit on debate on that. Okay, under structured, HB 942. Any opposed? Okay, it's on. Under structured, HB 932. Do I hear a motion? Any opposed? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 1146. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 1082. Do I hear a move? Any opposed? Under modified structure, HB 986. Any opposed? Listen up on this one. Under modified structure, HB 933. Do I hear a move? Any opposed? It's under modified open. It'll be modified structure on the. Under modified open, HR 1376. Do I hear move? Any opposed? Under modified structure, HB 456. All right, we've got a 456. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. It's on. Under modified structure, HB 541. Move. Any opposed? Under modified structure, Billy, you're having a run today. HB 692. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, HB 845. Any opposed? Under modified open, HB 766. Any opposed? Under modified open, HB 548. Any opposed? And it's under open right now. I'm going to move it to modified structure. HB 900. Any opposed? That's a good start. See y'all.
Good start.